Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and I'm here with Audrey Waters, and we are looking at the week in her Hack Education posts.
Happy New
And
Year.
Happy New Year to you, Audrey, and to everyone. Although it didn't start as a Happy New Year for you.
Oh, I know.
Let's go out of time sequence because you're certainly your last post before the roundup, which isn't actually published yet, was not a happy post.
No, it wasn't a happy post. In fact, I've sort of spent this week feeling rather glum about 2012, which is funny having written all of these trends posts, thinking through 2011 and the obligatory posts predicting what'll happen in 2012. Sort of out of the gate, four events happened that made me just sort of shake my head and sigh and realize that we have so many struggles ahead of us. I think to actually get things right, to get things on a positive path forward.
Well, so let's look maybe a little bit specifically. Um, okay, there were four things that kind of bothered you, right?
Yes.
So let's start with was it Course Kit? Did you start with Course Kit? I can't
I
remember.
started with code year, but
Oh, Code Year.
we can start with either.
No. Take them in order. So Code Year and Code Academy,
Yes.
right?
So Code Year, this was Code Academy that I have blogged about before in a infamous blog post now, full of expletives. And Code Year is Code Academy's sort of really quite brilliant marketing campaign, asking people to sign up for an email notification, a weekly email, and it's part of a New Year's resolution, 2012 New Year's resolution to learn to code. And I've had, like as I said, I have some pretty serious questions about Code Academy, about sort of how they're actually teaching or whether or not people will be able to learn to code through the system. And as such, I felt, the response with, so far I think 200,000 people have signed up to get this weekly email from them. And it's just talked about as though somehow that number we're confusing that number of signups for actual sort of learning outcomes.
So what bothered you there was maybe the misinterpretation or even misrepresentation, but
Yeah,
also the just sort of the core belief about how you would teach coding.
right. I mean, I think that's part of the concern I have here, right? I don't, this is a company that says, this is the fastest way, the best way to learn how to code online. It's free. And I'm pretty skeptical of that, having sort of gone through all of their lessons myself and really feeling as though I wasn't really learning anything. And then sort of the way in which, I mean, it's something that we talk about a lot. It's the way in which sort of new education technologies are talked about without really thinking about what matters. And what matters isn't really page views or signups or users. What matters is learning. And I feel like we forget about that far too often.
So there have always been differences in people's beliefs about learning. But as we sort of increasingly move toward this model of independent financial ventures, is the danger that we're going to see sort of like the infomercial approach, which is trying to convince people of something as a cure-all when in fact learning is much deeper for the most part?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that what I'm partially, I think we're not even actually talking about. We forget to even talk about learning. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I would certainly say one of my 2012 resolutions is to actually spend more time learning how to code, but. And I think I think that it's a great thing that people are deciding to do. I just can't believe that we would honestly think that getting a weekly email from a company is that path.
Interesting. Okay, Course Kit and Khan Academy were both, to me, kind of about a concern about financial power.
Right, right. And we've talked about CourseKit before. CourseKit is a new learning management system that it launched to the public only a few months ago. This was a company founded by three former University of Pennsylvania students who sort of actually dropped out of college in order to pursue their startup. And it's that's the learning management system continues to this industry continues to receive a lot of funding from investors, and this company raised $6 million. They just announced that they've raised $6 million. And again, I mean, congratulations to them. That's, I mean, I feel here I am raining on, both Codecademy and CourseKit's sort of parade, which is both of these things are great news for these new companies. But CourseKit has no business plan, right? So right now they're giving away their tool for free to professors, and they don't know how they're going to make money. And I mean, I have a lot of concerns, and there are a lot of education companies that fall into this category. That what Douglas Rushkoff says, right? If you aren't paying for the product, chances are you are the product, and by that I mean your data, your interactions, may be sold, against your knowledge, with your sort of implied terms of service consent. And I'm just quite hesitant about these sorts of new companies.
So it's a lot of money,
It's a lot
uh,
of money.
no real business model. It seems to me that there's one of two possible outcomes. One is it just ends poorly, right? I mean, you can't actually create revenue. The other would be that, like you said, somebody gets sold. So either the people that think they're customers become the product, or the company has to create a financial model for its investors, in which case it's less likely to be authentically about learning. So is it just sort of a bad feeling when you see that much money for something that's that intangible?
Right. And and as I mean, I think that you know I think that CourseKit might be on the path of something new. I mean, I think that they're one of these startups that are definitely rethinking what the learning management system even needs to look like. Do we actually need these large, institutional-wide tools that are very much about a closed system, walling off students' interactions from the rest of the web? And so I think that CourseKit has some great ideas there. But like I said, I mean, I just think when I see that much money being invested in a company without any revenue, it just gives me pause.
Yeah, so a little bit of a warning signal, maybe. And although a very different business model or financial model, you felt the same way about Vi being brought on to Khan Academy.
Yeah, this one. I must say this one really upset me. I partially because I think I have a lot of concerns again about. I mean, it's this question of pedagogy, right? How teaching happens, how teaching and learning happens is something that we need to think about. And I think Khan Academy receives a lot of praise, when in some ways we really are seeing in that case just short 5-minute lectures being made it turned into video. This is really just sort of a narrated textbook explanation. And for a long time, I thought Vi was an interesting alternative to Khan Academy. She describes herself as a math musician. She's an artist and a mathematician. And her videos are animations that she works through very complicated mathematical concepts, and she sort of doodles her way through them as she narrates sort of explanations and artistic ways. And it's, to me, it always seemed like the best, like what you can see the sort of the joy of math. It's a very creative and not at all lecture based video. And so I've also often thought of her as sort of the anti-Khan Academy. So to hear that she joined Khan Academy, I think was again, congratulations to Vi Hart. Now she doesn't have to, she has a patron, right? She doesn't have to go out and worry about speaking tours and advertising revenue on her videos. She's free to do what she wants, she says, at Khan Academy. But again, I wonder how it fits into sort of Khan Academy's larger, sort of the larger political questions and the sort of this larger platform. I think that Sal Khan is working on building, that is very much about adaptive learning, exercises, drills, and not at all about sort of the love of math.
Interesting. Okay, and finally, Apple as a disruptive force for textbooks. Yes, and that's going to be obviously a very open project, wouldn't you imagine?
Right. Because the textbook publishers of the world right now are absolutely in support of open source and the open web and open education resources, and they're not at all interested in closing down, shutting down the internet or yeah. So this is all, this is rumor and speculation, but Apple has a big media event planned this month, and according to according to some of sort of inside sources, say that they'll be making a major announcement about textbooks, which, if you read the Walter Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs, was purportedly the last project that Jobs was working on, and his vision was to sort of disrupt the textbook industry, which he saw as very bureaucratic and I just am not sure. I'm not sure that Apple plus the textbook publishers is actually disruptive in the way in which I would like to see. I would like to see educational resources be disruptive. But that's just me.
Well, and this is complicated too, right? Because we've talked about the sort of cognitive barriers to being fully open, and how a lot of what we see as open activity has to be within the context of sort of personal motivation, which is not always generous, but it can have a generous result. So we have this sort of unique relationship with Apple, in which many people love their products, they love the customer experience, and yet it's not really an open platform.
Right. I mean, and I think that I'm just not sure that or in the Isaacson in the Isaacson biography, there are actually very few details about what Jobs was thinking about. But one of the things he said is that he had sort of thought about hiring writers, having them create the textbooks, and then give the textbook content away for free. So when you buy an iPad, for example, you get your textbooks for free. And I just don't. I think that the way in which the textbook industry works is, the way in which sort of the knowledge that appears in textbook works too. I just think it's a lot more complicated than that, and that is actually not the way in which Apple disrupted the music industry. Apple didn't hire musicians to make music that you get for free when you buy an iPod. So I just am sort of deeply skeptical that this is actually going to be, or why it might be disruptive of the way in which sort of we buy textbooks now. I'm not sure that it's actually going to be moving things forward. And considering some of the great strides we've seen in open education resources, I just don't think we would ever find Apple to be the defender of Creative Commons openly licensed, DRM free, shareable, remixable content.
Interesting. Okay, in the Belly Laugh of the Week award, my Belly Laugh of the Week award goes to your I Made a Math App video. Yes. I can't post it on my own blog because I'm too family friendly, but there is a line in there about Dan Meyer that had me on the floor. Okay, so Extra Normal, many of us have watched these really clever videos. You've created one that I really like. But I don't get this pricing model. I just cannot imagine it working.
No, and that's actually the This is one of the things that I find now. It's particularly, as a technology journalist, I get a lot of people pitch me their stories or their products, and I have to have, there has to be an interesting story, and for me to write about it, and it actually has to be something that is, I believe, sort of useful in the classroom. And I think, when Extra Normal first came out, I think there was a lot of excitement. It is an incredibly easy tool to use. And as you build your animated video, it really works you thinking through the script writing process, thinking through camera placement and character and pauses. And I think it would be a great tool to use in the classroom. That being said, they instituted a pricing model that just I can't imagine it would work for anyone. I mean, it's too expensive.
It's
And
not just that it's too expensive. Again, it's this selling directly to teachers.
right,
And what teachers have this sort of discretionary budget to purchase something, even if it were cheaper?
right. Well, I mean, certainly if this was something that you were going to, pay out of pocket too, I just don't know that, because it's a subscription model thing. I mean, I just can't. I mean, Extra Normal is great, but it is also quite gimmicky. And you might have your students make one animated video, but it's certainly not something that you'd want to use sort of week in and week out, or month in and month out.
That's a good point.
But my video is pretty funny, and Dan
Yes,
Meyer
and
does get a great shout out in it. Who I should
it's
add,
really worth watching.
when I wrote up my Viahart Khan Academy story, I did want to say that Viahart is actually my second favorite math video maker, because I think we all know that Dan Meyer does make the best math videos. And as far as I know, Dan Meyer is not for sale. So
How funny. Well, so it also occurred to me that where we've seen, there are some really good models here. Wikispaces is a really good model. Ning for a long time was a really good model, where if you provide the service for free to educators, it fills a need for them, they use it, and they really evangelize the platform.
right.
I mean, think of all the dozens to hundreds of students potentially who become aware of a product because of a teacher's good use of it. So I'm surprised when they wouldn't take that into account, thinking that here mass numbers and mass adoption would be better than trying to make money from the teachers.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense at all for me. But then again, when it comes to sort of some of these, I mean, I think that we're really struggling to see sort of what kind of business models do work in schools. I mean, even even my hesitation about Course Kit being free. I think, I think that we have to really think about what is going to work in getting your tool into the hands of students and teachers, and then as an entrepreneur, how are you going to sort of put food on your table?
I'm going to give a shout out to Wikispaces because I've known Adam Fry for years now. And, Adam has resisted the temptation to kind of go for the grand slam home run.
Yes.
They just sort of consistently have provided a product of quality, made it free for teachers, and then built kind of a loyal, authentic following and been able to make enterprise sales. And that willingness to not jump on the VC big money bandwagon,
Yep.
In many ways serves as a really good model of how you would build something that makes a difference in education and pays for itself.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, I would have to say that that Wikispaces and Adam is I think definitely one of the companies in education that I think is sort of is good all around, and there are actually sadly quite few of those.
Okay, so you made a move. You put your money where your mouth is, and you moved from GoDaddy.
I did, and it was I moved to Hover, which is a Canadian. So I moved off of GoDaddy, moved to another thing, and it actually took almost 5 days, I think, for GoDaddy to finally release my information to move me elsewhere. But yes, I'm done with GoDaddy.
Interesting. Okay, that's because of SOPA.
It is because, well, I mean, actually, this is sort of embarrassing because I should have left GoDaddy a long time ago. The company has terrible advertising that is ridiculously sexist. Their former CEO likes to kill elephants, but SOPA was indeed the final straw.
Okay, so you were so sick of top 10 lists that you made several lists this week.
I
And not
enjoy.
only that, they had a variety of numbers to them. A top 11 list. You did have a 10 list, and you had a 5 list. We're probably going to get to all of them here. But what did you learn about what was most popular on your blog?
Well, this is this is one of the fascinating things I think about the internet is that I think if and several people sort of made had these realizations about the sort of the most popular stories of the year, and if you were to look based on what is the most popular person or the most popular story, we're actually a society that really only cares about Beyonce announcing that she's pregnant and Justin Bieber, and so and I think that was sort of one of the big lessons for me was that that not the most important things that happen in education technology weren't necessarily the most important stories on my site. Although certainly anything I write about Khan Academy seems to be wildly popular.
Right. And you make a distinction between nuanced looks at topics and hyperbolic praise.
Right, right. And I think that I think that hopefully hopefully as hopefully hopefully I'm one of the voices that is sort of looking critically at Khan Academy and not and not just with the headlines that this man single-handedly will sort of save us from inferior math teachers.
I love the irony of the University of Phoenix login
Yes.
direct traffic, right?
This is great. I mean, this is sort of my homage to my former employer, Read Write Web, because one of their one of the stories that drove the most traffic to that publication is a story about that was titled "Facebook Wants to Be Your One True Login," and it was a story about Facebook launching the Facebook Connect button. But when people would Google Facebook login, like people looking for www.facebook.com would Google Facebook login and they would actually find that Read Write Web story. And there were thousands of comments there from people saying, this latest UI for Facebook is awful. I quit, where's the login button? I quit Facebook. This is ridiculous. And I had the same experience this year with a story. It was really just sort of a throwaway story about, well, not a throwaway story, but it was just a very fast story about sort of the decline in enrollment in University of Phoenix after some of the legislation changing how they could recruit people. And for some reason, my blog is on the first page of University of Phoenix login. So I get a lot of people looking to how they can log into their University of Phoenix accounts.
So if somebody really wanted to do some damage, they could take advantage of this, right? Set up fake login pages for services.
Well,
And
I think that you could. I mean, you could definitely do that, or as I think the presidential candidate Rick Santorum has discovered, there are many ways in which Google's PageRank and the and SEO can be used to get all sorts of things onto the front page of a Google search that aren't necessarily what you want to be looking for.
right. Yeah, I remember reading at one point the large numbers of people who used the search bar in Google in place of their URL box.
Right.
And so if people search for University of Phoenix login thinking they're going to the login page,
Mm-hmm.
they hit a story from you about the declining enrollment. Hmm. Are you sure that wasn't purposeful?
I'm quite sure.
Okay, so a Mathalicious was an interesting story because, again, it's a story about teachers paying for a
Mm-hmm.
service, but with a little bit of a different twist here.
Yeah, and again, I should probably say now that that Mathalicious makes really wonderful math education content, math education videos as well. So, but they've done a really interesting thing, which is to rethink their business plan. What the company does is it actually creates lessons for teachers, and these are all sort of Common Core aligned lessons to help them sort of help them teach math concepts. And it actually very much is sort of in the Dan Meyer mold of things, right? So these are real world math applications, sorts of math that you would use in your everyday life. And I don't just mean sort of how to make a cake out of different sort of half cup measurements, but sort of things, interesting questions about what happens on the wheel of, the probability of a wheel of fortune spin, and things like that. And so they sell these lessons to teachers. It's a subscription model, and teachers really love the content, and the students really love the lessons as well. But they were finding teachers said teachers just couldn't afford it, and so they revised their business model as a pay what you can. This idea that rather than say sorry, we're sorry you can't afford it, that they've created some different pricing tiers. And these tiers don't have different access. It's not as though you get less when you pay less. I think it's just a recognition that not everyone can afford the subscription.
So that's there have been some pay what you want experiments. I'm trying to remember the restaurant chain that did that.
Panera.
Oh, Panera Bread.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But for me, it was kind of intriguing because, again, it seems like this is part of the larger dilemma. Pay what you can, or pricing for teachers, but there's still this ecosystem for selling to education that really makes it hard for the small guy, right?
So you mean makes it hard for the entrepreneur to sell?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the dilemma. I think that selling to schools, selling directly to school districts is incredibly challenging, and I think most people really want to bypass that. And so if you want to sort of go the grassroots route, if you want to sort of go directly and sell directly to teachers, then you are faced with the dilemma of the limited pocketbook. And although teachers, it's this awful statistic that teachers spend a ton of money out of their own pockets every year. It's still hard to get that right.
So if we sort of stick with the math and money topic, right, we can go out of order again here, and Slater and this math homework answers project.
This is fascinating to me. This startup is really interesting to me. Homework help websites are sort of, it's not just that they're sort of seen as cheating, but a lot of them are actually. I mean, the quality of the responses aren't that great. They're just sort of one of that sort of disreputable parts of the educational web, right? But Slater actually has built a really interesting product that they've actually found the 100 most used high school math textbooks, and they have all the answers, not just sort of like, those books have the answers to like the odd number answers in the back, but they have all the answers to all the questions and the actual mathematical proofs. So they've done that by hand. They've built out this website. But what they're doing is that they're now sort of adding in this microtransaction level where they're encouraging students to submit their own mathematical proofs, their own answers to their homework, and they're rewarding them with points, which eventually the students can actually sort of cash out and make money by posting their homework answers, and then they sort of pay with points to get access to the answers as well.
That really struck me the wrong way.
Did it?
Oh yeah, I mean anything with points and money and education. I'd like to be proven wrong that there's some good model there, but we've seen that with some of these teacher websites. Mm-hmm. Creating lesson plans and getting paid and back and forth, and I don't know. It just felt to me like if you read any Alfie Kohn, all of a sudden, are you really just creating all kinds of the wrong incentives around, learning?
Well, I mean, I think that we should probably back this up even further, right? Because this is actually a homework assignment, and I'm not sure, right? I mean, I think that we could sort of ask some of those difficult questions right there from the start, like how much of homework really is a positive learning experience?
On the Alfie Kohn scale, this story rates like a -30. Right? It's about homework, and then it's about rewards and points.
Right. Well, I mean, and I think that there are some troubling aspects to that for sure. But I think that, the fact of the matter is that students are assigned homework, and when they get stuck with homework, they turn to each other for help. They've always done that, and they turn to the web for help. And so I think Slater wants to sort of help connect students students who are peers with each other in this online place where they can sort of get answers from each other, share answers from each other, and are incentivized to do so financially. So
again, I don't wish anybody any ill will, but that one really felt bad to me.
yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into your 3 prediction posts.
Okay.
One from your own blog, one from Mindshift, and one from Inside Higher Ed. You have generic predictions, and they are pretty generic.
They are generic. Yeah.
And then you have some specific ones. So why don't we start with the specific ones? Google canceling the Chromebook.
Yeah, I see this coming. Although someone reminded me that Google usually tends to ignore things for a year and then cancels them. So maybe I should say Chromebooks will be canceled in 2013.
I'm a huge Google fan. I've always been a huge netbook fan. I'm a huge Chrome fan. I have not bought a Chromebook, and I'm going to guess I'm not alone.
Yeah, I have a Chromebook. I like it, but again, I just don't see, unfortunately, Google putting a lot of energy into the Chrome operating system, which is funny considering this is, the company that we perhaps most closely associate with the web. They've sort of forgotten about their web-based operating system in order to really push the mobile operating system. And the Android operating system. So I just don't see the Chromebook lasting, and the partnership with Samsung as the hardware maker. I think there are probably other things too around this that, to me, the Chromebook program is probably in jeopardy.
I'm going to pull some threads together here that seem pretty disparate, but they work in my own brain. So I am a big Android fan. And my wife lost her phone, which meant that I could pass along to her my Android phone and get a new one. Mm-hmm. And I got the new Google Nexus phone. And the experience is very good, and it's quite similar to my Android tablet experience. And so you make this prediction that iPads there's going to be some study showing that iPads don't provide benefit to learning. Is that because you actually believe that they don't provide benefit, or you think somebody's going to come up with a study to say they don't provide benefit?
Actually, I think that somebody will probably come up with a study to find that they don't provide benefit. But I think that it's actually, what I meant by this was really more, really more about sort of the uncritical praise that we have for the iPad as being the device that will, quote, revolutionize education. And I'm always skeptical when we talk about things that way. But I just don't know that the iPad itself is really necessarily going to make a difference in terms of learning.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think this is one we're going to spend a lot of time on in the future, I'm quite sure. I do notice that there's an enthusiasm around learning when you can actually use the tools that you're using in regular life that are exciting in the classroom. Mm-hmm. So I wonder what connections will be made there. But I will also say that this phone and my tablet have really become very significant learning tools for me. And I'm wondering how you'll feel about that prediction in a year, because I find that as an individual, these are really incredible learning devices for me.
But but I'm just not sure that that's something that I think that that's something about that we could probably extrapolate. You're actually using sort of the Android tablet as
right.
And is it the tablet, or is it having a mobile device so that it is sort of anywhere learning? Or what would make learning on an Android phone, for example, different than an experience on an iPad, based on operating system, based on size?
I would even want to be a little bit more generic, which is the device that can carry all of this literature and material and audio allows me to pick and choose when and where to really shift my learning to fit my style. And so maybe it may be that we qualify this and say that the iPads don't provide benefit to formal learning,
Right.
but I would certainly say for my own personal learning or informal learning, a huge impact.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I'm probably going to be wrong on a lot of these.
Well,
So.
no. I didn't mean that to sound like such a stark contrast. I will say though that I had something happen this week that maybe again I'm pulling together some disparate threads that maybe has an impact on sort of how we view content and our access to content. So I've been a big fan of Google Music for the last month and taking all of our downloaded bought music and putting it into the cloud. And I just was unaware of Rhapsody.
Mm-hmm.
And Rhapsody is a monthly subscription service that lets you listen to basically anything you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really good model for content for me.
Yeah, I think that that's a lot of these subscription services. I mean, and we could think even like Netflix, for example, right? Where no longer are we necessarily interested in owning DVDs. Okay, maybe Netflix isn't a great example because you can certainly not watch anything you want with Netflix. But, this idea of having a subscription that opens up access to unlimited content, I think is a very different model than the ownership, right? Which is I must own these books on my shelf, or these record albums on my shelf, or these DVDs on my shelf. So I think so. I think that we'll see. I definitely think we will see a move, particularly as things become digital, to a more of a subscription-based and an ownership-based future.
It'll be interesting to watch that with regard to Apple's announcement. Okay, so how do you see Arnie Duncan stepping down and Karen Cater taking his place? Was that tongue-in-cheek, or
No,
do you really think that's going to happen?
I'm not sure about Karen Cater, but it wouldn't surprise me at all that Arnie Duncan needs to go away if Barack Obama wants to win the teacher vote in 2012.
I get it now.
Right, because I think for people who might otherwise be willing to cast a vote, a vote to reelect Barack Obama, I think, if you look at his track record, his education track record is abhorrent, and I think Arnie Duncan is pretty symbolic of that.
So I am going to use all of my self-control here to not mention other members of his cabinet that would need to go away.
Well, yes. But this hack education is a tech education.
That's right. Okay, so let's shift to Mindshift, where you have 12 trends: mobile, bring your own devices, natural user interfaces, web apps.
Yeah.
Again, knowing we have limited time here, and you can talk about any of those that you want, but Mark Sermon from Mozilla kind of educated me this week a little bit about seeing the phone as a thin client or a thick client. I hadn't thought of that. So to what degree does it make sense to move away from the downloaded app to apps that run off the web and have their processing power behind the web?
I think that this is going to be I think the move to HTML5 in particular, which has a number of new features to it. So this is the latest version of HTML. HTML5 has a number of really important new features to the technology that I think make it incredibly powerful, right? It's the promise, for example, to be able to replace Flash in terms of video and audio. It also works offline, which is really important when you think about internet access and connectivity. But I think that the web works across devices, right? As long as you have internet access and are using a modern browser, I should add that little asterisk, and are using a modern browser, you can access an application that is built with HTML5. Which I think is incredibly important, particularly since not everyone is using, not everyone has a Windows desktop PC any longer. Not everyone has an Android phone. And certainly not everyone has an iPad.
Well, and it also answers this issue of the control of the Android marketplace or the iPhone marketplace, and the sort of the amazing degree to which we've allowed them to kind of control what we have access to.
Right. I mean, and I think that it's in, what I should add here too, like you could still build an app in HTML5 and submit it to those marketplaces and have it download and appear and act as though it's a native app. But the thing with when it's built in HTML5 is that it really works across devices. It renders across devices, and that is it's really important for equity in education, I think.
Well, and it also means that you could access it through the web, and it doesn't have to go through somebody else's selection process.
Right. Exactly.
Fascinating. Okay, so there's so much here. I'm just going to call some of this out so people will think about going to the post and actually reading them. But grappling with big data, adaptive learning, privacy and security, openness, open software, open content. I've really seen a decline in interest in open source software in the last year. So my guess is, from my perspective in K-12, I don't think we're going to see a lot of that. But certainly, open content is huge.
Yeah, I think that
Do you want to argue with me?
no, well, the one thing I would say in terms of open source and is that I think that there are a lot of things. For a long time, I think we saw open source was associated, and this is actually a conversation I had with Mark Sermon today. We open source for a long time was associated more with these enterprise technologies, right? So it was this it was a matter of whether or not sort of IT was going to choose open source or choose proprietary software. But I think there's actually so much that goes on under the hood of today's technology that really, I mean, the web itself, right? The web itself relies on open source. The LAMP stack is an open source set of tools, and I think as open source is stronger than ever. I just think that it tends to be in these little pieces under the hood, as opposed to sort of buying a whole package, for example.
The big shift that I saw was an enormous number of open source advocates who basically sort of jumped ship when they could save $500,000 or $1 million by doing Google Apps for Ed.
Yeah.
And sort of the wholesale abandonment of a lot of locally installed open source software.
Well, and I think that this is actually, we talked a little bit about this of my trends posts about the subject of open in general, and I think that there's a lot of folks that use open as an adjective, and I think Google is one of them. I think Google does do some great work, and it's open. It does open up a lot of its code, but not all of its code. And I think Google likes to act as though it's open, and it's not always the case.
Okay, there's so much here. Gaming, then in the higher ed, accreditation and what will count, your MITx story, peer-to-peer again, community, robot grader, and adaptive learning.
Yeah.
What is a robot grader?
Well, a robot grader is actually who handled the 100,000 some odd students that took the Stanford online artificial intelligence class. And that, of course, that's hardly surprising, considering that would be the perfect sort of assignment for an AI class. And I think that this is something that artificial intelligence folks, machine learning folks, are very much interested in. The adaptive learning people are all interested in developing tools that can assess and make decisions and learn. These programs can learn themselves. And I think that we will see, I mean, and this is actually, I think MITx will also be using a robot grader. And I think we'll see a lot more of this.
One of the slides I love to give in my presentations is a picture of the Dick Tracy watch and the Star Trek communicator, because I think that oftentimes we dream of things in science fiction that end up becoming our reality, in part because we dreamed them, and we sort of move toward those dreams. And I got to thinking about our vision of education in science fiction, and it seems to me it's either you plug into a machine and it dumps all of this data into your brain, or
which someone proved this week.
Oh, what's that?
That was actually, someone did some research at Boston University, and they actually were able to get a response like that. That if with visual stimulation, they were actually able to perhaps make some move forward with being able to see things and having it dump into our brain, like the Matrix.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Well, no, no, no. Fascinating. The other intriguing vision we have of education is that in the future, it's actually highly personal. And I realize that, I have a lot of images in my mind from science fiction movies where it's a very Socratic environment. And so that's sort of inherent in our vision of the future are these very different and dual images of education. One sort of highly sort of robot data dump oriented, and the other kind of back to highly personal.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that I think I've been thinking a lot about. I've been thinking a lot about some of these adaptive technologies too, which are all again based on algorithms. And I think that many of them, right now at least, are very predicated on sort of the knowledge that there's a set amount of knowledge that students should know, and that a robot grader or an adaptive system can deliver and assess only within that sort of limited amount of knowledge, which is a very different way of thinking about this. Really doesn't include sort of curiosity or discovery or anything outside sort of like that core set of questions. And so even though a lot of these tools are talked about in terms of personalized learning, you'll see that on all of the adaptive software sites. I'll say the future of personalized learning, but it's really only personalized in terms of whether you get the questions in an order of 1, 2, 3, or whether you get 3, 2, 1.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's shift to your as of yet unpublished, but by the time this comes out, it will be published. Roundup. So happy 10th anniversary, No Child Left Behind. Happy, joy. I love your style.
Yeah, I mean, it has been 10 years since No Child Left Behind was passed. And although I think the bill is up for reauthorization, I think we can certainly see a shift in the last 10 years as a result of those sorts of policies. And I'm sure everyone listening will agree that we are such a happier, more joyful education system. Thank you, No Child Left Behind.
Tell me about the troubles of the Akash tablet.
Well, you and I talked about this. You asked, I remember when it first came out, you said, is this vaporware? And I said, no, it looks like they actually have a tablet. And so this is sort of the much bandied $35 tablet that the Indian government, or it's a Canadian company that's building it, but that the Indian government has sort of subsidized. And no surprise, when a $35 tablet went on sale, millions of people ordered one. And needless to say, they didn't make millions. And from what it sounds like, some of the first ones that are getting into people's hands are lousy, as in the battery lasts an hour, the touch screen doesn't work. So there is a tablet, but I guess, it's cheap.
If Amazon is selling a tablet for $199 that we think they're losing money on, and it's getting complaints,
Right.
just seems really hard to imagine this being possible.
Yeah. I mean, I think, without sort of even more substantial, subsidies from the government. Although, I think we are seeing some pieces that's, like the Raspberry Pi, that some of the building blocks in this hardware are getting a lot cheaper, but I'm just not sure that, I mean, again, the iPad has set the bar so high. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get that same sort of experience, or even close to experience, even an adequate tablet experience from a $35 device. Not now, not yet.
So imagining my 13-year-old daughter right now, I'm imagining my 13-year-old daughter right now demanding a subscription to EasyBib to do her bibliographies. And it actually feels very real, and that I probably would pay.
EasyBib is, I would heartily endorse this tool. If you have a job or you're in school and you need to make a bibliography, which is still one of the most incredibly challenging and time-consuming processes. I just can't say enough good things about EasyBib, which is it's such an ingenious tool. You snap a photo with your iPhone or now Android, and it fills in all of the bibliographic details from the ISBN, right? Author, publication date, publication place, puts it in the beautiful MLA format, and presto, there you go.
Interesting.
And you pay for the
Okay.
subscription if you don't use MLA. So.
I loved it. Okay. Google passwords. Right. I wasn't quite sure where you were going with this, but are you now doing the two-stage password with Google?
The Chrome OS does not actually have two-stage authentication. The Chrome OS, because I mean, again, this is the operating system that runs the Chromebook. Remember, this is one of their great promises: is that you're supposed to turn on, you're supposed to log in 8 seconds or less to make it incredibly easy to distribute these and use them in the classroom. And so January 1st, I went through my sort of regularly scheduled password update, and I changed my Google password, which I definitely do use the two-step verification, and I went to log into my Chromebook, and I couldn't log in. And I thought, what the heck's going on? And I was trying to do all this troubleshooting, and then I tried my old password, and my old password still worked. And so the Chromebooks don't actually update your password right away. They're not actually connected to your Google account password, which it's not a huge security leak. It's not sort of like the end of the world, but it's certainly something to be aware of too. If you're a teacher using Chromebooks and someone changes their Google password and they can't get their Chromebook to open, that's why.
Hey, and here's the story that I missed. I just missed it on the neuroscientists.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so knowing that we continue to stretch our listenership's patience with the timing, anything else in the roundup you would want to draw attention to?
Let me look through here. I don't think so. I think we covered all of them.
How funny. Okay, again, a fascinating week of news and information from you. I'm hoping that you aren't feeling as discouraged as you felt at the beginning of the week.
No.
And that you're able to process through that and stay positive and engaged.
Yes, actually, it's been one of those funny weeks that I think I had sort of that dark rain cloud over my head, but I think, moving on. And afterwards, I think I was on Inside Higher Ed Higher Ed Live had me as a guest on their show yesterday, and having talked to Mark Sermon this morning, talking to you today, it's sort of onward and upward. So,
good for you, Audrey. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye now.
Bye. Company, and it was I was surprised.